thesis, this thesis that you're making, this collection of poems, this stack with promise, it's just a book in the making. And you're just going to be making that book until it's no longer able to be revised. You love every single word and it's all in place and it's just like you like it. And the titles are right and the epigraph is right, which I just found this morning for my new book. So I had one, it was Cardi B, and I was like kind of using it as a placeholder. And then it all came close circle this morning when I was going through my notes to share with you. I came across a Facebook post of a Dante, Paradise Lost, Milton, and the last poem is my first long poem in the manuscript that I just finished. And it deals a lot with, it's really slight, it's 56 pages of poetry. Um, you don't have to write 90 pages. I started 1 year ago around April, and I'm just finishing it now. It started at 190 pages of just gobbledygook, and so I guess my first bit of advice is um, be gentle on yourself and be hard on the poem. It's not it's really not killing the babies, as they said. It's more of a distillation process where you're only accepting the very best into your manuscript. I was just looking at my first book, Flowers is Mind Control, and this poem, $9 Bacon, I wrote in 20 minutes while I was at a workshop in Oregon. It was near Seattle, I forget. It starts with a P. Sounds like Portishead or something. But I paid for a workshop out there and went out there, wrote it 20 minutes while I was cooking bacon for my colleagues and friends. And then there's another one in here that took me 20 years to really get it right. Can everybody still hear me? Okay, good. Um, so, the first book took me 20 years to get into shape, coming and going from poetry. So you gotta kind of be easy on yourself about that. It's not a race, it's a long distance race. It's nobody's, I know that there's that temptation to want to be recognized for your work, but really the work is how you will get recognized, not cleverness or social media or advertising yourself. It's the actual poems. So I take revision really seriously. It is the hardest part, and that's why you have to learn to love it. The first thing I do is I have an active printer. I keep highlighters and a pen that I like around. I turn off the TV, I turn off the radio, I turn off the music, the phone turns off, and I go ahead and print out a fresh copy of the poem or the manuscript. Now, don't be furious to take notes on all that I'm going to talk about today, because I'm going to send the file of my notes for this class to Hope at Hand, which I really love as a nonprofit. It's one of the best surprises of coming back to Jacksonville. I just drove by it, walked in and said, "What is this place?" Because it said poetry. And I said, "Oh, I'm a poet." Um, so John Keats said, "Beauty is truth and truth and beauty." And I took that seriously, meaning those are the two things you need in your poem for it to be good, right? Um, you can go to the next slide if you want. If you have your poem at hand, we can go ahead and get started. Um, Steps to revise the language, the lyricism. Now, I said this in my last course with Hope at Hand, but narrative poetry has really dealt a blow to lyricism in poetry over the last 35 years or so. We had the image poets of the 70s, which were amazing. And then things got very narrative, and that's fine. But you have to remember that we're not prose. You have to get it down to the most beautiful language, the most compressed, the most distilled. And Rita Dove says that's where poetry is at its best, where language is at its best, is the distillation and compression of prose into poems. We're not writing a story and then breaking the lines. So the first thing I do, and this is going to probably pain some of you to hear this, but the first thing I do is I learned from Ilya Kaminsky that was it Breadloaf, and I said, and he was brand new to the scene, and I said, well, how do you revise? And he goes, well, I just, underline, or in my case, highlight everything that I would stake my life on, which is a very Russian poet thing to say, Ukrainian poet thing to say, sorry. And um, but I took it seriously, so I did it and it worked. And sometimes, you could be writing for days and have like a 4 or 5 page poem, and it could end up being 6 lines. And that's something you have to get really comfortable with doing. Um, because you only want the best in your poem. You want the power to come through the lyricism, which is what separates us. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to underline the images or the lines you absolutely would stake your life on and get rid of everything else. And if you can't do that, let's start with just underlining the nouns. So find the nouns in your poem and underline them. And we're going to do something with this later. But as William Carlos Williams said, there really is no ideas but in things. And those ideas can sometimes feel lofty and exciting in the moment. Then we have to go back with our revision head, not our romantic head, and circle those abstractions. So take a moment after you underline the nouns to go ahead and circle your abstractions. Love, desire, pain, all the things that are very, very big. And we're going to do something with those as well. I'll give you a couple minutes on that and just talk about revision in general. Revision in general. My hair is 3 days dirty. I have a coffee stain on my t-shirt that I slept in because I was revising last night. I'm drinking lemon water out of, I think this goes on my blender. It's one of the storage things that goes with my blender. And mocha espresso out of my grandmother's old coffee thing. I just found my epigraph this morning. So it's never not chaotic. It's always a little here and there. But where the order comes in is on the page. If you're trying to say something in 4 lines, try and say it in 2 or 1. Repeating yourself isn't going to make your poem better. Repetition will make your poem better, but not repeating your thoughts, right? Make sure that there's a narrative through line and connections between all of the images. When I was trying to be a writer, you hear the first things you hear are in mixed metaphors and all this stuff. And so I just kind of try and make through that it all makes sense. And I got called out on it when I was in school getting my Ph.D. I said something like the breasted pebbles of dirt. And my teacher looked at me and she's like, really? Really? And I was like, okay, I get it. I get it. I went over the top on that one. It doesn't make logical sense. So I had to change that. No abstractions. All images have to work like a machine, and they turn the gear to the next part or movement of the overall purpose of the poem, which you may not know yet. If you're not a different person by the time you change your poems, then you haven't really written a poem. It should change you. It should change the way you think about everything. You should learn something about yourself that's new by the end of the poem. And it may not be good. It may be bad. It may be sad. It may be exciting and joyful, but you will have learned something new and the poem will have changed you. And that's what makes it worth writing. Tell the truth. Nobody likes to be cheated. You're the conduits. You're the universal vehicles for emotion for the whole world. Poets are rare. Nobody chooses this. I didn't, when Travis broke my heart in the 9th grade, I didn't pick up a guitar and write a woeful ballad or paint a picture or throw a dart or make a leap in a dance or something. I wrote a really bad poem that started something like last night Pained me as the night before, wounded dart straight from the core of this mangled, murdered heart. Something from a lover's dart, and I think it had a dagger in it. So, I mean, be gentle on yourself because everybody writes kind of over the top poems in the beginning and in the middle, and probably later going forward. But you kind of have to treat it like your baby, these poems and this manuscript, just because um, they're that important to you. That's your life, you know? So the next thing we're going to do on the page, for every circled abstraction, you're going to need four nouns that speak to your senses. So I learned this also from Ilya Kaminsky. I circled the abstraction love and put like, the doorknob where he walked out, the hose lying in the grass, the painting given to me on the wall behind me of Sarah Vaughan singing, for the photograph. So pick for every abstraction, pick four nouns and kind of do like a web, right? We'll revisit those later. The reason we tell the truth, what really happened to that person or that place or that animal or that time in your life. Um, Even if it hurts to write it, you have to, because the first time I read Ode to a Nightingale, I cried and cried because I just felt the death in the poem of how everything is so impermanent. We are impermanent. I have a cough right now, a scratchy voice because I'm making a record. And like I said, I'm a mess, but I had to tell some truths last night into my poem that were kind of devastating because I want everything to be perfect. And I'm okay with that. It's not going to be. You'll always publish something. Look back on it. Here's the second book, Bright Life, Animal Heart. And this one took me a year, 2 years to write while I was teaching in Oklahoma. And it was much harder than the first one. The first one made me happy. And ever since the first one, I keep saying, I'm going to write a happy book. And then something terrible happens in the world, like right now, like we're living through, a big crisis. And I'm like, well, this has to reflect the times because Nina Simone suggests that all art should reflect the times that we're living in. So I just gave up. And my new book is called Alligatored Everywhere. And my new manuscript, sorry, it's not a book yet. Because I felt trapped on all sides and from all people, politics, family, money, jobs. And the book really reflects that. And I just said, well, maybe the next one will be a happy book. Maybe I've already written that one. So your intentions are one thing. What the poem turns out to be is a whole different thing. You can go in and say, I'm going to write a happy book. And then it turns out to be the saddest book you've ever written or the saddest poem you've ever written. You can't have an agenda. And I noticed this when I was out in Oklahoma because I'd have a lot of graduate students who would say, well, I plan to start trans, disability poetics. That's my plan. And I'm like, okay, well, the poems still have to be top notch, no matter what your agenda is. If you want to sink that identity into your work, do it. By all means, be fearless. But you can't have an agenda when it comes to a poem. It has to overtake you by the end. All right. So now that you've done that, double underline your verbs. Take a moment and double underline your verbs. I always start here too. Like, what does the poem look like on the page? Is the shape or the form of the poem reflective of its content? Should I move everything to the right margin? Should I use couplets? Does it matter? I remember working with Billy Collins in a workshop. He said, somebody said something about like, well, this is a really good line. And he said, well, we have to ask the question, are we line makers or are we poem makers? And we're poem makers. You can have a great giant piece of poop poem and have one great line in it. It doesn't make the poem better. It just means that you're able to write one great line. We're poem makers. So with that, I say, does each line or each image match up to the best one in the poem, which is really ferocious to say to poets starting out or to poets in having trouble revising, but it's really true. Um, would you stake your life on each one? And then I learned this from Jimmy Kimbrell by way of Jane Springer. Another way to think about it, as far as form or shape, is does your poem have equal amounts, like a triangle, of, we call it the narrative triangle. Jane Springer should have uh, that published somewhere, but lyrical, narrative, meditative. Most people start with narrative, but if the lyrical is not there, your triangle is off. If the meditative growth is not there by the end of the poem, your poem is off. It's got to have equal measures of lyrical, narrative, and meditative. And the way you can kind of tell if it's off is, one of these sides of the triangle may need more attention than the other sides. I was the opposite. I started off writing heavily lyrical poems that needed to be grounded. And so all my feedback from students and teachers alike would be like, ground this, you're out of control. This is just like lyrical nonsense. I don't even know where I'm at or what's going on. Some people start from a narrative place and they get too close to the fire of prose and they have to reel it back in. And then if you don't have any meditative in your poem, then you haven't grown as a poet or a storyteller, which is to me the hardest because when Bright Life Evening Heart, COVID was happening when I started it. And I mean, I always have poems in the cooker, but I just started collecting them, saying this is the stack I want, I think. These are the best ones. And mind you, like I said, this one, The Alligator Everywhere, was 190 pages. And I got it down to 56 in 1 year. Because longer is not better. It's just true. Um, you should be able to read a book of poems at the beach. Um, a good a good poet like Carl Phillips usually turns in a book around 50 to 55 pages. Same thing with the late Deborah Diggs. Her best book, Vesper Sparrows, was probably 49, 50 pages in the beginning. So you don't have to do this tomb of your work, of your life's work. You just kind of bite off 50 pages at a time. Go to the best 50 pages. All right, so now that you've double under your verbs, for every verb, consider putting the opposite of that verb. Take a moment. You're going to have a little brain.
I apologize, Laura. We've lost the visual of the PowerPoint, so give me just a moment, okay?
Okay, I'm just doing it verbally then.
Okay, perfect.
So if it's black, put white. If it's, running, maybe capered. A lot of our verbs in poetry are lazy, and it's really this kind of silent killer of a poem. Um, so do that for a minute. Opposite verbs. Now, after the narrative triangle move that I do, these are my first 8 or so steps, and I've structured the notes that way so that you can be followed when Hope at Hand sends you this document, if you want it. The last question I ask after I finish a first draft of a poem is it moving or is it clever? And that's an unfortunate thing that a lot of people make a mistake with. I remember a poem somebody wrote about like their stripper cousin in Mississippi. And there were some really great images in the poem, but then she kind of did something clever with the ending and the title, and it killed it for me because I was just kind of like, this is not a joke, you know? Like, it's not a joke. You can't try and like wow people. Look what I did here. Can you see it? It's a real doozy of a joke on you, elbow nudge wink, you know? Nobody wants that. They want to be moved by the poem. Okay. So after you pit the opposite verb, Pick an adjective, and adjectives are really tricky as far as adjectives and adverbs, you have to be very, very, very critical of the line. An adjective should surprise the hell out of your noun. It shouldn't be easy. It should surprise the hell out of the noun. So take a moment and do a scan of your poem for that. Do you have any lazy adjectives or adverbs? Like, I tried to do that when I did breasted pebble of dirt, but I went too far in the opposite direction. But it should surprise the hell out of your noun. All right, and then we get into the idea of a second checklist that I go through. The argument. Is it there? The structure. What form does the story dictate? And again, the breasted pebble of dirt. Logic. Can you actually expect your reader to view it? They have to be able to see it, right? Does the reader know where you are and what's happening at all times? Do the lyrical leaps obscure the image, line, or stanza? The worst thing, and I say this to my composition students even, it's, the worst thing you can do is confuse your reader. We're not being cryptic here. We're not being cryptic or clever. We're trying to be real and truthful and moving. And this is how you get at that. Okay, so after you pick that adjective that surprises the hell out of your noun, can you correct the first line? The first few lines. If you need that info, can you put it in the title? The title does so much heavy lifting in a poem. You can do so much with it. I think of Dennis Johnson when I think of this for some reason, because he always had these like long titles that were, look at me, I'm a poet, but really he was a prose writer. He wrote 3 books of poetry and then jumped over the fence and started writing prose. And that made him money, I think, because he realized you can't make a living writing poetry. Does your poem end 4 times? If you don't want to cut the end, do you want to move it up? It's okay to play Tetris with your stanzas, especially if it makes the poem move more quickly, if it's more engaging. Because I'll tell you right now, this is the way I view all prose and poetry. If you're not getting me by the first couple of pages of the book, I'm out. And that seems the same thing with a poem. If the beginning of the poem doesn't hook your reader, then I wouldn't expect them to keep reading. If your ending is the great part, why not move it up to the beginning and tell the story backwards? Okay. When you have a fresh draft, and I really recommend, I mean, home printers are awful to us, but you do need one. You need a reliable printing source, put it that way. I moved into an apartment that's way too expensive because they had free coffee and free printing and a pool. And so I just consider that every time I pay rent. Um, Read it backwards for any interesting discoveries. Take a moment and read your poem backwards. That might help you to figure out the order in which you want to tell the story. And I say this too, but you have to be gentle with yourself and humble with others. A lot of times, I mean, this is a true story from this week. My friend Sean Singer at Sean Singer's Substack, it's a great, great Substack called The Sharpener, and he delivers it every day in your email inbox for like $7 a month or for free if you don't have any money. He takes private clients just as I do, and which supplements our teaching income. And somebody hired him to, start revising their manuscript. And the poem was just really cliched and really awful. And Sean is such a gentle editor that he said, you consider like this, and this. And the poet blew up and said, well, I'm not going to pay to converse with a peer, to conversate with a peer, or something like that. And so in that case, and I get it. Like so if you're not writing and you're a writer, I think I don't remember who said this, but you will go mad. You always have to be making. So, and that's why my life is completely a mess, but I love writing poetry so much that I'll put that effort in. Um, but you got to stay humble because other people know more. They've been around longer. Maybe they have like a special knack for something that you're not good at. Like I said, I needed to be grounded, so I had to read a lot of narrative poetry to the point where it bored me. To get back to understanding how a poem moves with lyricism and beauty at the center. Okay, so the next step is now, I asked you to do this in the very beginning, but also now. Now go back and star or highlight your best lines and your best moments and repeat them in a second way, a new way to make things new. I'll say that again. Star or highlight your best lines or moments in the poem you're working on. Repeat them in a second way, a new way to make things new. And if you've ever encountered the Ezra Pound uh, looming figure over early 20th century poetry, that's who said that. Make it new, always make it new. Because everything's been done before. We've all covered love, death, pain, breakups, makeups, marriages, children, pets, loneliness, all of the things that a human can feel has been covered in poetry. So the reason we try and make it new is because we want to keep it going, I think. Every time somebody says, well, I don't understand poetry, I don't read poetry. And I'm like, there's something in this world that you love enough that you would, sacrifice your life for it in a way. Um, that's what I get from poetry. I can't think of any other thing I'd rather be doing than reading great poetry or listening to great music. Those two things propel me. And I think that those two things are honestly the only version of witchcraft that is real. Um, the word spelling is to cast spells on people. And I feel that way in the same way that Emily Dickinson talks about it. You know, if the poem is that good, it makes you so cold, no fire can warm you. If it's that good, it takes the top of your head off, right? And I told my friend who's in creative nonfiction right now and is new to writing, but she's like me, middle-aged, and she was intimidated because she's a single mom of two boys and everything. And I just said, honestly, whatever you're writing, CNF, fiction, poetry, it should feel like you got struck by lightning. I mean, that's what it should feel like when you're done. If it's not that powerful, then you still have work to do. Okay, so content or cliche language is the snow was white versus black.
Excuse,
Uh, hello.
excuse me, Laura. Hey, I'm sorry. We had a technical difficulty and the PowerPoint stopped running. Can you tell me which slide you're on?
Oh, you're right there. I'll go to the next one, maybe. Okay,
Okay. Does
then go
that
to
look
the
good?
next. Yeah, that looks good. Maybe go to the next one even. Okay, there you go.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
Absolutely. And this brings me to my next point is the surrealism as a part of poetry. We are witchcraft, we are dream weavers. Do not be afraid to be weird in your poem about things that are common subjects. Like I said, the snow was white versus the black snow fell over the city, right? You don't expect that. It's weird. Um, if you want to say life after death, that's a cliche. We've heard that so many times. And it's hard to recognize cliches in your own work, but the idea is to go in and just do a sweep. Sometimes I go in just for spelling. Sometimes I go in just for cliches. Sometimes I go in just for titles. Is every title good? And I know that because that's how I've learned. Sean taught me this. That's how I learned to select the titles for my books. So the last thing I did when I got 56 pages was, okay, I need a better title than the one I have. So I picked all the best lines of poetry throughout the entire manuscript, put them in a document, and then started looking for ones that were so weird that nobody's ever written a book called Alligatored Everywhere. And then I Google to see if anyone's written a book called Alligatored Everywhere. You want everything to be yours. You don't want them to think about, that's what an epigraph is for. Um, if you want to say after Svatayeva, after, Rita Dove, you can do that. But the epigraph should be directly related to the content of the poem. And the title should be something that no one has ever thought of. It should come from your mind, your poetic mind, your poetic line. So when they get to that line in the book, they're like, whoa, this was just an image before, but then she made it the title. So instead of life after death, we all travel to our past, something like that. Okay, next slide. Don't be afraid to be surrealistic is my point. Okay, there we go. Now I've talked about this before, but every line should be as good as your best line, which sounds like an impossible task, but that's what makes revision so incredibly daunting. And it's what also makes your poem so incredibly original. The ending. Some people say, Sean always said this, end on an image, not a thought, not a lofty idea. But then you come across like the James Wright poem, oh gosh, St. Duffy's Farm, poem composed on a horse or something in St. Duffy's Farm, that ends with just an idea, like, you know, will I ever be as good as this horse or something? I can't remember it right now, which I'm ashamed of because I love that poem, but a lot of us, this is another topic, a lot of us want to be like another poet. I started off wanting to be just like Larry Levis and Marina Tsvetaeva combined. We all have our favorites. I suggest you do a deep dive into them during one part of your life and then to move away from them so that you don't sound like Larry Levis or Marina Tsvetaeva. I want to sound like me, but I know that every book of poetry I read, and honestly, I say this, keep a stack next to you wherever you are. Wherever you write. My friend came over in grad school and said, where's your desk? Like, where do you write? And I was like, I write on the couch while I'm watching movies. It's just an ADHD brain thing, but I like it. I I tend to like to have noise in the background. When I'm composing, when I'm generating, not when I'm revising. When I'm revising, I'd go somewhere else to try and make myself feel like a stranger reading the book. And I literally said that the other day. I told Sean I need to print it out and go by the pool, which I never go by, and sit by the pool and read it as somebody would read it on a vacation or on a trip or something. So your generating life needs to be separate from your revision life in a way. You need fresh eyes. That's why I didn't touch the new manuscript all week because I was teaching, but I also didn't touch it because I needed some space from it and I needed to read some different people. So I picked out some great, great poets who don't write like me. And I put them next to where I work so that, I mean, I can honestly say I didn't know you could be angry in your poems until I read Svetaeva or Wanda Coleman. um, and so your mood is also a thing. You have to be a little fearless in your revision mind. Whereas in your generating mind, you can be wild and romantic and wild nights, were I with thee, off the handle, but you need your sober mind when you're revising. So there's that. Next slide, if there is one. And let's see. Okay, so I would write myself notes like, okay, we just did this. Cliche language is the enemy of poetry. I was rather intense when I composed these notes. But it's true. It's the opposite. I mean, you might even be able to use them in a joking way in dialogue and prose, but in poetry, it kills the poem. Because the only thing that matters is the original truth and the original beauty. One thing that I thought of too when I was thinking about this course was how time markers work. So I have a poem called Murder Hole, comma, Brooklyn, comma, 2019 or 2011, I think it is. And I got the idea from Yeats, who famously composed Easter 1916. And I love Yeats. Everybody loves Yeats. Pilgrim's Soul is one of my favorite images. And I even tried to copy his poem When You Are Old when I was in my early 20s. But then I forgot about that poem because I lead such a chaotic life and I became a country singer. So when I went back to try and become a poet again, I picked it up and I brought it to my workshop. And my teacher said, "Why would you want anyone to think about Yeats when they're reading your poem?" And I was like, "Oh, I forgot to change the title." So I wrote a poem based on his poem because it moved me so much. And then it became a totally different original love poem when I changed the title. But that's something to think about, is that sometimes we forget that we're modeling our work after somebody. And you have to go back and say, "Oh, I don't want people to think about Yeats." Um, I often ask myself too, like, if the poem is really, really difficult, I'll ask someone, even if I pay them to read it for cliches, just because other people can catch stuff that you can't because you're too close to it. This is why we do workshops with each other. Um, so I'd write myself little notes like, examine how you are saying it, Laura. Is it present tense? Is it anecdotal? Is it chronological? Do you Are you putting the details of the title into the poem or vice versa? Can the poem can the poem's title do more heavy lifting that you don't have to address? So when I titled that poem, The Murder Hole 2011, I didn't have to talk about the murder hole, which is an apartment I had in Brooklyn. It was a storefront apartment on the BQE. And it had a basement with like a swinging light bulb. It looked like a psychological thriller basement because it was where you put all your stuff for the store. Um, so think about how time markers are used. Some of my, all of my writers, even composition students, at 8:15 a.m. on June 27th, I met him. We dated for 6 months, 4 days, and 3 hours. Think about how the time markers might be getting in the way of the beauty and the truth, is that point. Write a poem. I love this line. Write a poem with whom no one can disagree. Tell the infallible. And so that's where truth comes in. Even if you don't want to, even if you're embarrassed, that's your job. It's your job to be embarrassed because, I know from my first book that it was so embarrassing. I didn't realize I was writing about alcohol as much as I was. And my editor put it in the, what do you call this? The ISBN number or whatever. Is at the beginning of a poem is supposed to tell you what the book is about, themes are. And it said, considerations of homesickness, memory, music, alcohol, love, and loss. And I was like, I don't talk about alcohol that much, Mr. Pressman. And he was like, well, it is show up, it does show up in the work. And I had to kind of be embarrassed for a second and say, well, they are over 20 years worth of poems. So, you know, I got that reputation and I had to kind of get talked down from the ledge by a much older poet than I am. And she was so graceful. And she said, just because you write about it doesn't make it true. You know what I mean? Like, you're telling a truth, but people are dumb. You're an easy target. Don't let them say that you can't write a poem without, writing about the things you used to write about. That was a time in your life. And I was like, okay, I get it. Thank you. I feel less embarrassed now. um, so be truthful because it's your job. That's the point. Stop being precious with language. And that's what I said, the breasted pebble of dirt, as stated today. I have a tendency to go precious because, life is really ugly and hard, and I want my poems to be beautiful. So I try and put as much beauty as I can in without that sandpaper, that astringency of lemon juice, which you need for the poem. So if it's too precious, squeeze some lemon juice over it. Metaphorically, get some sandpaper in there and tell the part that's hard to tell. I think it's Hemingway, it said, like, write hard about your pain, write truthful, hard things about your pain. Something like that. And he also said, oh, writing is easy. Sit down and you open a vein and bleed, but don't be precious. Clarify pronouns and images. Don't leave revision lacking in story or clarity of action. Anybody who's able to read above, like, the middle school level should understand your words in your story, right? Don't speak in code. And that's a hard one because poetry is kind of like that, right? But that goes along with being clever or being cryptic. Don't speak in code. No one can read your brain. Only you know what you're talking about in the poem. So it has to be clear to other people. Like I said, the worst thing you can do is to alienate somebody or to make them feel like they don't understand your poem or that it's too hard. You're not being profound. Profundity is the enemy of poetry as much as cliche is. You're not writing, I never say this word right, the over collections of poems by Laura Munner, 1 through 5, you know, you're not trying to be profound. You're trying to be real so that somebody in their most miserable moment sees your resilience on the page, your beauty and your truth, and says, I'm not alone in the world. This person has felt what I feel right now. I will not cry in my own course. Watch out for repetition of connective and transitional words like because and other connectors of and some and in fact and so. We use them in our, I tell my writing students in middle school this too. We don't write like we speak. It's a little bit, it's less, it's not conversational, it's not casual. You're not having a conversation with your friends. So, like you would talk to somebody or text somebody. You have to get rid of those expositional words that clog up the poem. Only the best moments. Watch out for repetition of connective and transitional words. So that's that. Either keep writing past the action or do not write past it. That's a hard one to explain. If you just keep going and going, like Ginsberg with his butcher paper on Benzedrine, writing, the great American poem, you might feel like you're a genius, but then when you go back and read it with your sober mind, you've just written the same thing over and over and over again. Can we go to the next slide, please, if there is one? And this brings me to the point we're right on track. Be brave. If you are invested, you will seek out craft books. I can think of like 12 on my top of my head. I'll copy and paste them into the document I'm going to give Hope at Hand based on these notes, which will be there by the end of today. So craft books are difficult because they're not always fun. They're not always easy to understand. Like I'm still trying to wrap my brain around Ellen Voigt's The Art of Syntax. I feel kind of dumb when I read it. Like I'm not into scansion. I'm not into meter. We're not writing formal poetry as much as we used to because it doesn't have to be memorized anymore. um, we have everything. We can do anything we want. With that said, I love a lot of formal poems. I mean, Shakespeare, come on. Everything must evolve. You, the poem, the book, the room you're in, the way you look at the world, the way you see your partner, the way you see your kids, everything must evolve by the end of the poem. And I truly believe this, that history, right? History is written by the victors. I hate that. We're the historians. The poets are the historians. We're the ones who reflect the times. And artist. I think it's Rhett Key that said, it is a classic art form, but in order to embrace it, you have to read widely across many different literatures. So I read international poems as a part of my poetry diet. Ilya Kaminsky has an anthology that's a great introduction into international poetry. You can find that anywhere. So you have to be brave. Avoid false starts. This is the process of revision that is hard. sometimes to get into a poem, we have to just be brave and we just start talking, and it's not really that great. But then, like the second stanza, you're like, now it's cooking, right? So sometimes you have to go back and look at your poems and say, did I have a false start? Is it not good until I really opened up and got into it by the middle of the page? And in that situation, we are butchers. We do have to just chop a whole stanza. And I remember a student colleague of mine, Sarah Lawrence, saying, like, it frightens me how easily you can just destroy a stanza. And I'm like, that's what it is. That's what it is. I mean, maybe I've ruined the poem, but I know that it needed to go at the moment. And in that moment, I was brave enough to do it. Um, so do that. Now, I've talked about the astringency and tension and the imagery, similes and metaphors. If you're too precious or you're too cute, you're too clever, um, people will walk away. They didn't invest in you for that. They wanted you to tell the truth about that surgery or that war or whatever it is that was so painful. Use more direct speech. Use the one true sentence kind of direct speech. Plain speak, this would fall under meditative in the narrative triangle. So if somebody doesn't know what has evolved, then you haven't done your job with the direct speech. Most importantly, it says here, don't let the reader get lost in place, speaker, or multiple speakers. That's a hard one. So sometimes you get a poem from a poet and it's a great poem, but it has 11 people in it. You're gonna have to make some choices. Just like all writers have to make choices. Should this person be in this poem, or is that a whole different poem? Sometimes there are just too many people. I have a couple poems about my grandma and my grandpa in this book. I have a couple poems about their deaths, and the first book I had poems about my mother and father and my brother, and the second book I had poems about my friends a lot. But they don't all go in one poem. They need to be separated. Um, Consider omitting extra adjectives and excessive adjectives. Use the active voice, not the passive voice. The title needs to be rooted in the poem's bones. It can do a lot of heavy lifting if you need it to, but it needs to say something to and with the poem. Abstract concepts, we talked about this, circling them with nouns, need to become concrete images. Don't mix metaphors. Don't let the language obscure the action of the narrative or stanza. Focus on a clear trajectory of story and action and beauty and truth. Think out loud in places where you leap or blow past the opaque imagery. Always figure out the poem's start, the poem's ending, and the poem's title, and set it up right. Now, here are some things. If there is a next poem, next slide, you can go to it. This is just kind of something to get you motivated as we end here in a few minutes. I'm going to let you guys speak out if you'd like to, and maybe read a couple lines if you want to. But this is what people want from a poem. They want investment, authority, a resting on the cognitive level and on your heart, right? On the level of the heart. It has to hit both. You can't have one or the other. Lock in the trajectory. Is there an answer to a question? Is there a question? Is there an urgency? Is there imagery, musicality, truth, something different? I love finding new poems that are doing something different. I love it. The author is working something out. Does it have an original voice to be present in the moment? The sonics are important. The music is what drives the poem. And that's kind of hard to figure out, but that's where that original spark of genius comes in when you're generating, as the music falls in place. Humility, we're just, like I said, conduits. It's coming through us and out the other end to the people of the world. How powerful is your last line? Could you end on an image or direct statement? Oh, here it is. James writes, I've wasted my life. So he talks about this horse and this farm and all the things going on. And at the very end, he just says, I've wasted my life, which I love so much because it talks about the beauty of nature. Overall tips. When you think you're done, do a cliche count check. Make sure. Keep the tension of the poem together, never too much air. Poems work on fields, right? Horizontal, left to right, top to bottom. But I believe the poem is a dive. I want it to feel like that scariness of a dive into a body of water. A poem is a dream. Helen Vendler said this about form. You don't have a poem without the container, the shape. Hugo said he wouldn't allow theater majors in his workshops because they could make a telephone book sound good. Don't act your poem. Let the words on the page speak for themselves. You're not on a stage. The only stage is between you and this anonymous reader. You're responsible for what is factual in a poem. You're responsible for what is true, but you don't have to like rely on that. If the poem is more interesting as a yellow car than the blue car that you had, make it a yellow car. Who cares? Um, okay, so then we go to revising the language, which is what I just had you do. Are there any questions, or does anybody want to say a line that they changed today that blew their mind? Don't be shy.
And everyone is able to unmute themselves.
I mean, those steps that I took you through just now to change the actual poem, the first time I did that, my mind was blown that you could do that. And it came from not going to school, not getting a degree. It came from just working with a person who was hosting a workshop like this in Miami. Which I try and seek out. And if you're not a degree seeking person or you don't want to teach poetry, which at this point I don't recommend, uh, I would, I mean, it's no longer synonymous with talent, and poetry is no longer synonymous with professor. That's all I'm saying. There are tons of great poets out there who have no intention of ever teaching, but everything you need now is on the internet. So taking tiny workshops is better in a way for your wallet than taking big degree seeking. I mean, those places that we used to call the Ivy Leagues of creative writing really don't exist anymore, or they're too out of reach. So my recommendation is for you to go to these tiny workshops all over the country, like I did. I learned as much from them as I did from going to school for it.
I can change a line. I can share a line I changed.
Yay! Okay.
Okay, so I originally said you couldn't get them out of your hair, and then I changed it to, see here, quietly leave them twisted with your hair.
Oh, see what I mean? That's the developmental magic. When you twist
Yeah,
something around and make it
I was
weird.
shocked.
It is shocking. I'm so glad that at least one person felt the need to say something. But because I really love that line now. I mean,
I don't know where it came from. I just know that I thought about what you said about the get out. Like, okay, that's like commonly used. It's not, I guess it's not a good action verb phrase.
Mhm.
So I was thinking maybe I can you said say it differently too, the
Yeah.
opposite. So I chose the opposite, and then I decided to think about if it would match the hair. So you said ask a question. So I asked the question, and that's how I got the line.
Yeah. It's so fun to do this to all of your poems. It really is. And thank you for sharing.
Thanks.
Victoria. Anyone? Yeah. Hi, Beth.
Hi, I'm actually asking a question from someone else in the workshop about the title. Is it okay, I mean, to use the first line of the poem as the title?
Yeah.
That was, yeah.
You can
Yeah.
do that, but what I've seen a lot of people do recently is to use it as the title and then to just drop into the second line. So that you don't
Oh,
repeat it. Yeah. I mean, you can I do that for the titles of the book, but not the poem. But you can just drop in, and people just assume that you're picking up where you left off with the title.
oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Aaron, hi.
I have a comment. Not one of my, I'm too embarrassed to even share what I was fiddling with.
Now you have to share it.
Ironically, yesterday I was listening to Terry Gross interview Merle Haggard, and I wrote down your line, I have such a chaotic life, so I became a country music singer. And I thought, I want to read his lyrics. I don't know but it was a great interview. And it
Oh,
took his experiences, San Quentin, and Johnny
I love
Cash.
him.
It's so, I'm just saying.
He's the reason I taught in Oklahoma because I
Oh
wanted to
my
know where he was
goodness. Oh,
from.
you give me
Yeah.
goosebumps.
That's great. I'm gonna look it up. Jan. Hi. I think you're muted.
Yes, I had
Okay.
I've been working on this poem and I've been thinking about the title too. And
Mhm.
and I was like, is it important? Like, is it important to let people know what is in the poem and the title, or could it just be, as you said, the first line? So
The
can
one
I
thing
give
I'll
you an
say about
example? Can
Yeah,
like
the one thing I'll say about that is if it's a one-word title, it gives me a little bit of, I'm not sure if I want to read it. So if it's
okay.
called Desire or like Apple or something, I don't know. I'm just kind of like, So be creative with your titles. They can be long. They can carry all the weight of the poem. And it doesn't have to say, I mean, the murder hole was my apartment. It wasn't a real murder hole. It just kind of, the basement just kind of looked like it. But I have some really plain titles like Home State and then New Girl at the Seed Factory. But Flowers as Mind Control is what ended up being the title of the book because it was different. So that's all I'm saying is the titles need to be so original that somebody's drawn in. And then you can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else have?
I can share another advice I took of yours.
Oh, cool.
If you want
Yeah.
to. Okay. So I said take what you can. I said take what you can with you, light on your back. Now that's the original draft.
Mhm.
And then I revised it, taking your advice. I said, don't take what you don't want with you.
Nice.
Only what your chosen life inside your mind say you should. A sunstroke on your back. So instead of saying light on your back, I said sunstroke.
Absolutely. You
Okay.
you did it. You isolated a cliche like light on something and you
Yeah.
twisted it,
You said
right?
you said you could keep the same meaning, but like pick a better way of doing it. So that's what I did.
Yeah, I had sunshine pissing once, and somebody was like, I never thought a poem could have the sun pissing on somebody. And I was like, it just, the color. You don't be afraid to be crude or funny in your poems as well, because other people think about human qualities or characteristic traits. Other people are crude. Like Catullus was extremely vulgar, um, and about sexual poems and stuff like that. So it's really okay to go to the depths of each emotion you have um in these poems and go ham, you know, go ham on it. Any other thoughts? I would love it if everybody what do you call those? The QR codes. If you left some good feedback for Hope at Hand, it's such a great nonprofit, and they help at-risk youth in Jacksonville, which is the largest city spatially in the country. So they're doing the good work here. But I just want to thank you all for joining me today. It's been really fun, and it makes me want to go revise my own work. So I printed out a copy of Alligator Everywhere so that I wouldn't be just the person telling you to do something, but the person doing it as well. And I'm going to go through it right now. I haven't had breakfast yet, but I'm going to go. Somebody brought New York bagels to Florida, and I'm going to go get my New York bagel. I'm going to go through each line, every single word, every single title, every single period, and make sure that it's in place before I send it out. That's what we need to do, that quality control.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you too. Bye, guys.
Hey, Laura, do you have a Substack?
I don't, but if you go to Sean Singer's called The Sharpener, you'll learn more than you've ever learned about poetry because he's as obsessed as I am, but he's a better student, really.
Instagram?
I have an Instagram, Laura L. Miner. I have a Blue Sky. I have a Facebook. It's all Laura L. Miner because the woman in Connecticut that's Laura Miner, I have to separate myself from her. She won't get out of my life. She keeps sending me emails. So it's always Laura L. Miner, but I'm on, I think, everything except for X.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you
thank you
so
guys. Thank
much.
you, Ruth.
Thank
You're
you
the
so
best.
much, Laura. And
Have a great revision. Have a
we
great revision.
appreciate your wonderful workshops.
Thank you
And
so
thank
much.
you, all of you, for coming to Open Jack's Poetry Fest. So this was our 10th annual Poetry Fest this
Oh,
year, and we look forward to seeing everyone next year.
and I'll be an attendee next year. I want to take some courses. All right, y'all. Have a good
All
one.
right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.